Nancy, can you tell us what you do here at the Lawrence Hall of Science in women and gender and mathematics?
I'm director of the Equals program here at the Lawrence Hall of Science, which is a program to enable more female students and more students of color to become involved in mathematics and science. And we started this program a long time ago in the very early 70s, at the height of the women's movement, really. The women's movement was gaining a great deal of momentum in the early 70s, and they were dealing with a lot of issues. But it wasn't until about 1973 that the issue of women in mathematics came to the attention of large numbers of people. And actually, how that happened is kind of interesting because it happened here at Berkeley. There was a doctoral student who did a study on entering women students at Berkeley. She asked a random sample of, it was a small sample, maybe 100 students, about their math preparation, males and females. And she found that the female students had far less math preparation than the males, and consequently the kind of majors that were open to the females were far fewer than the males. And in other words, all of the mathematical and science majors, as well as many of the business majors, were closed to female students because they hadn't had 4 years of high school math. Now this seems to make perfect sense to us now, but 20 years ago nobody had thought about that. Girls simply took as little mathematics in high school as they could get away with because they weren't interested in it. And I'm speaking generally now, obviously not all girls, but the majority of girls tended to go into language and arts and social sciences and steer away from math and science. So the woman that did this study, her name was Lucy Sells. She came up here to the Lawrence Hall of Science, and we're up on a hill overlooking the Berkeley campus. And she came to us because she knew that the problem of girls' attrition from mathematics didn't start in their senior year in high school. It started long before that. And she knew that we had many young children coming here to the Lawrence Hall of Science to learn about math and science. And she felt that this was the place to begin to do something about that problem. And we listened to her, and it amazed me that I had never thought about that before, because I was the kind of person that she was talking about. When I was in college, I decided I wanted to be a psychology major. And when I found out I had to take statistics, I then decided I did not want to be a psychology major, and I became an English major, and I never even tried to take statistics. And I thought, isn't that interesting? It never occurred to me that I was closing all kinds of doors that I'd never even opened because I just decided I couldn't do statistics or I didn't want to. So when she did this study, it really hit home to me. And we began to look at our enrollment of students coming here to the hall, and we did a study. And we looked at all the classes, and we counted how many girl children there were and how many boy children there were. And guess what? No surprise. Less than 25% of the kids that were coming up here to the hall to take after-school math and science classes were girls. In other words, parents were sending their sons to the Lawrence Hall of Science. And they were sending their daughters, I suppose, to ballet classes or art classes, but they weren't sending them here. So at that time, I had a title called Director of Public Information, which meant that I was in charge of informing the public about the Lawrence Hall of Science. So I decided that this is one of the things that the public should know about. And a group of colleagues and myself created a class called Math for Girls. And it was a class just like all the other math classes we had, except we called it Math for Girls because we wanted to let people know that the Lawrence Hall of Science was a place for little girls to come as well as boys. Well, we got all kinds of irate phone calls from people saying, how can you do this? How can you have a Math for Girls class and not have a Math for Boys class? And then we explained really carefully that we had about 25 Math for Boys classes because we had 25 math classes and they were all populated by boys. And we used the opportunity to educate people, to make them aware that we wanted to have more girls coming to the hall. And the class became very successful. We wrote articles about it, and it's still going on. We started it in 1972. This is 1990. It's been going on all this time. So once you got over the hump of people saying, what are you doing? And you got them to stop and listen, they said, like I did, oh yeah, that makes sense. We hadn't thought about that before. So that was the beginning. And in this Math for Girls class, which was largely getting kids to become interested in math and have a good time with it and play games and do problem solving, but we had female teachers. We had students from the university who were majoring in math or majoring in science teach the class, so that the little girls, and again, these are 6, 7, 8-year-old girls, had the opportunity to see a female teacher in mathematics. And they loved it. And we thought the problem was solved, because we thought they'd come up, they'd take Math for Girls, and then they'd see that there were all these wonderful classes at the hall, and they'd sign up for more. But what actually happened was they came and took Math for Girls, and then they wanted to take it again. They didn't want to take a physics class or a chemistry class or a biology class or a computer class, and they had better names than that. And we thought, isn't that odd? And then we realized that the problem was a great deal more complicated than we had thought. We thought if you could just get them here, get them to enjoy themselves, that experience would transfer to every kind of math or science experience. And it isn't true, because the socialization of children is so strong, and the messages are so strong about what's appropriate girl behavior and what's appropriate boy behavior, that one class with mathematics does not change that. So then we had to make a rule that if you took Math for Girls once, you could not take it again, but you could take more Math for Girls, because we didn't want to lose the kids. And we thought, well, if we can keep them a little longer. And then in the more Math for Girls, we'd have the instructors come in from other classes and talk about other kinds of things they could do at the hall. And slowly over time, we did build the enrollment of girls coming into the hall. But it took us much longer than we had thought, and it required a great deal more effort and more understanding of the situation than we had previously thought. So we did that for a while, and then we noticed that what worked for little girls, that is girls 6, 7, 8, 9 years old, had nothing to do with pre-adolescent girls. Because if you dislike mathematics by the time you're 12 or 13 years old, you are simply not going to go to a Math for Girls class after school, even if it's in a great place like the Lawrence Hall of Science. That's not what you're interested in. So we had to think about adolescent girls and what was important to them and how we remembered ourselves as adolescent girls. And we created a network called the Math Science Network, where we drew together women from all kinds of fields and interests, parents and teachers and scientists and business people, who wanted to really concentrate on the issues of getting more girls involved in science, and particularly wanted to work around the issues of adolescent girls. And we created a conference called Expanding Your Horizons, which was simply a one-day event where we'd bring girls from 12 to 18 years old on a college campus. We'd get them involved in doing math and science in a fun way, and we give them an opportunity to sit in small group sessions with young women who were working in math and science fields. It's very simple, very straightforward, except that nobody had done it really that way before. That was in, I think, 1976. And we started out with one conference with 200 people on a local college campus. Well, that idea has spread so that there's about 40 of those conferences, probably about 60 of those conferences every year all around the U.S., and a number of them in foreign countries. And we're maybe reaching 30 or 40,000 kids a year with this one-day experience, which, while it's only one-day experience, is an important step in creating awareness not only among the girls, but among their parents and their teachers. Well, finally, doing these things for students is really gratifying and it's fun, but it doesn't make a dent in the problem. Because as long as you are serving individuals, you can't create the impact that you have to have. So then we decided around 1977 that we really need to focus on teachers. Because for every teacher, we can reach, if she's an elementary teacher, we can reach 30 kids. If he or she's a high school teacher, we can reach 150 kids through that teacher. And a large amount of our work in the last 15 years has been going into teacher education, as well as parent education, because we've had a number of spin-offs from the Equals program. Equals itself, which is our teacher education, believes that teachers are knowledgeable and well-meaning people who have a strong commitment to children's education. We have a lot of respect for teachers because most of the people in the Equals program, all of the people in the Equals program, have been teachers themselves. And we don't think that you tell teachers how to do something and then send them off to do it. You listen to them. You listen to what their concerns are. You listen to their knowledge of their craft, and you help them extend that knowledge into new areas. And the new area that we were working on was the issue of girls, and then subsequently the issue of minority students. So we created a program that's 30 hours. It lasts for 5 days. They come for 2 days in the fall, 2 days in the winter, and 1 day in the spring. And they spend, and there's usually 60 to 70 teachers together in the program. They come from all over the Bay Area. They're grades K through 12. And they come here to learn about and to share with us their experiences about retaining more female students and more minority students in mathematics. And the way we've structured the program is we looked at the research that really only started in the early 70s on why girls drop out of math. And there was a lot of research, and the findings were, as in all good research, the findings turns up to be something that makes sense, good common sense. The reason girls drop out of math is that they don't believe it has anything to do with their future lives. It has no relevance to them. They don't think they can do it. They're not confident about it. And nothing in their world, no one in their world is particularly encouraging them towards it. So if you want to create a program to redress that situation, you have to address the issues of awareness, of competence, and encouragement. And that's the way we build our program. So we have activities that stimulate the teacher's awareness and understanding of what happens to girls when they don't take math. What are the implications? What doors are shut? What life opportunities are closed? What does it have to do with the economic system? What kinds of workers are we preparing for the future? What kinds of opportunities are we creating for women? So we have a lot of activities that deal with women in the workforce, women in employment, the preparation of women. The competence and confidence issue is one of learning and understanding and enjoying mathematics. We spend a lot of time with our teachers, many of whom are themselves math anxious. Elementary teachers, for the most part, have not had good experiences in mathematics, and they are passing on those math anxious feelings to their students. So we have to build up their confidence and their competence. And we do that by doing a lot of mathematics, a lot of problem solving, a lot of using what we call hands-on materials, blocks and beans, to understand how a mathematics problem works. Give them lots of experience in working together cooperatively in pairs, talking about mathematics, making mistakes and knowing that's okay. Because I think for a lot of people, the fear around mathematics is, a lot of people think you either get it or you don't. You're one of these people for whom math is easy or it isn't. And in fact, that's really not true. For most people who are good at mathematics, there's always a place where it becomes hard for them. Sometimes it can be very early and sometimes it can be very late. But it can become difficult, and you have to have the persistence to stay with it, and the confidence that you can do that. And so we're trying to build up in teachers who don't have that confidence a sense that they can do it, so that they in turn are more confident as they're working with their students. And then we did a lot with bringing in role models into Equals workshops, because we wanted teachers to meet women who were working in math-based fields and to hear about the kind of work they did, their own experiences in mathematics, and the variety of people that work in engineering and scientific fields. Because, again, we often have stereotypes. You don't see a lot of women engineers. Certainly students don't. And so they don't even have a concept about what engineers do, let alone women engineers. If you bring a women engineer into your classroom to talk to your kids, and they can ask her all these questions, how much do you make, for example, which is the first thing kids always ask people. Occasionally they'll ask them what they do, but they want to know how much they make and are they married? And do they have kids? Because people have a funny idea about science and technology, that you can do that or you can have a family. And of course that's a stereotype that we need to about. So that's what we do for teachers. And from that program, which has been going 13 years, a number of other programs and projects have evolved. And I think one of the most important ones is one called Family Math. The teachers who came to our program, and we've had about 35,000 teachers go through the program, and we've got 15 sites around the country that do Equals. And we have a number of places in Europe that also do Equals programs. But the teachers were coming to us and saying, well, this is great for us, but we have parents of our children who want to help their kids with math and don't know how. Their own math skills are very poor, they're afraid of mathematics, and we don't know what to do. And we don't have time to sit with these parents and teach them, but we know that this is an issue we need to address. So could you help us? And so we were really intrigued by that, and we obtained some money to create a program called Family Math, which we tried out in inner cities because we wanted to work with families that were perhaps the most alienated from the school situation. Poor families, African American, Hispanic families, immigrant families, who felt that the school was kind of a barrier for whatever reason to them, and weren't comfortable going to school and talking to the teacher about their children's education. Or maybe the only experience they had with school was the school calling them and telling them their child was misbehaving, or their child hadn't done this, or their child hadn't done that. Or perhaps the children were bused far away to school, and so the school wasn't even in their community. So we wanted to do something that would reconnect these families to their schools. And so the Family Math program was created as a way for parents and kids to learn and enjoy mathematics together. And we did it in schools in the evening, and we made it to a very non-threatening, enjoyable experience. Again, lots of hands-on materials, lots of talking, lots of problem solving, low pressure, high enjoyment. And that program has really caught on. We first started out just doing the classes, and soon we had to be preparing the teachers and parents who wanted to teach it. And then we wrote a book, and the program is spread all over the country because it makes a lot of sense to people as a way to get involved in their child's education. You know, if you want to help your child, what do you do when you want your child to enjoy reading? You read to your child. You know, you stick them under your arm and you cuddle up and you read a book. Well, if you want to help your child in math, it doesn't somehow occur to most people to do that in a fun, enjoyable way. They'll tell them to do their homework, or they'll say, let's practice your flashcards. But that's not the same thing. It's not a fun, nurturing, good environment. And so we created a program that really was fun. And parents came and said, not only is this the first time I've ever enjoyed math, but this is the first time I've ever enjoyed dealing with my kid in math at the same time, because it wasn't a negative, pressured sort of situation. And that program has been important for girls and their families, as well as all kids, but largely for kids who are what we call underrepresented in mathematics, and that means female students and students of color. And that's the focus that Family Math has had, and I think it's been an important program because as it grows in the community and it grows in the school, teachers and parents, teachers who are not involved in the program wonder what's going on. And they hear about it, and then they kind of get intrigued, and they say, what's going on here? And they begin to get sucked in ways that they weren't before. So it has kind of an impact in the understanding and the teaching of learning in mathematics throughout the school system, not just for that one class.
What about going back to the fact that this is a technological society, and that there hasn't been a place in the society for women,
right,
or for girls. Was there a place before and it was lost, or was there never a place in society for, or was there never a place in science and math, in science and technology, which it turns out now today we're talking 1990, it's a technological society.
Right.
When did women lose their place in science and math, if they ever had one?
Well, the issue of women in technology is an interesting one to me because, of course, women have always used technology in the most trivial sense of the word in terms of machinery. I mean, they use the typewriters and they've used all the appliances at home, middle-class women, that is. But when the computers began to appear in schools, it was very clear that there was only a very small group of students that were using them. They were generally affluent, middle and upper middle class students, and they were generally white and they were generally male. And why should that be was interesting, because the computer itself is a fairly non-threatening instrument. It looks like a typewriter. It doesn't require a whole lot of understanding if you just don't have to program it. But there was no indication that girls were going to become equal users of computers. And we looked at that. A lot of people did, of course, not just us. And we tried to determine what we had learned from working with girls in mathematics and to transfer that to the girls in computer situation. And what we understood was that it wasn't going to happen unless we did something about it. Girls were not naturally going to gravitate to the use of computers. Teachers were not naturally going to assume that they wanted to use them and include them in. Software was going to probably be a pretty violent, male-oriented kind of activity, because the people who were creating the software were young males who liked war games and the kinds of competitive software that we saw in the early years in the video parlors. That's the kind of software that we had. Largely girls had very little interest in that, probably because of socialization, but nonetheless they were not drawn to it. So the issue was, well, what do we do about that? When computers began to appear more frequently in, let's say, high schools, and there were enough to have computer classes, when you looked at the enrollment, it was very clearly segregated Males were taking programming and girls were taking word processing. And that means that males were preparing themselves to really understand and have power over the computer, and females were preparing themselves for the position essentially of technological secretaries. And that was creating an incredible stereotyping and ghettoization of employment. Well, I think that that has changed for a couple of reasons. One, learning programming is not as necessary anymore as it was when computers first came in. I mean, the only thing you could take was, say, BASIC and perhaps word processing. Well, now there's a lot of things people can do with computers, and they don't have to learn how to program. And I think that's helped a lot, and I think the computer industry, particularly, I have to say, the Macintosh, has been an enormous boon, because in fact anyone literally can get on that computer in a half hour, start using it, and go from there. I think people really are beginning to understand that. And so we don't yet have enough Macintoshes in schools, but when we do, we're going to see a lot more people of all kinds being comfortable with computers. So I think the technology being speeded up and becoming more accessible has helped. But I think people's understanding that we cannot create these ghettos of employment paths between males and females has also helped. And I think more computer courses are being created, integrating the computer into different subject areas. In other words, a lot of schools you go into now, there'll be a computer in the classroom, whether it's a history class or a science class or a writing class. And teachers who have access to the technology and are interested in it, can use that, will integrate that computer into everything that's going on in the classroom and make sure that all the kids are using it. And I think that's very hopeful. And I think that certainly wasn't happening 10 years ago. One, because the computers were more difficult to use, they weren't as available, and the teachers were not aware of what they were doing by saying, well, these are the kids that enjoy the computers, let them use them, and the kids that don't, we shouldn't bother about them. Well, it's not true. We should bother about kids that don't like computers, because if the more they shy away from them, the more alienated they're going to get from the opportunities that are going to be available in the information age, which is where we are right now.
Okay. You have something to add? Well, pues es matemática.
It's the same thing.
Yeah, okay. So we'll talk about socialization. I think
Okay, go ahead.
in our society, as in any society, there are certain expectations about male and female roles. And certainly prior to the 1970s, I'm not going to go, well, let me talk about from the 50s, because World War II is, oh God, I don't know where to go back, where to start. Let me think a minute. Sex role stereotyping occurs in every society, and I only know it best in my own society. And what that means, of course, is how people view the different roles of males and females. And when children are born in the society, there is a whole set of expectations about their behavior, whether they're born male or female. And these expectations, I don't think, were ever really challenged for many, many years. I would say, seriously, there have been periods of time in history, of course, when women have broken out of the stereotype roles. But in my experience as a woman growing up, say, in the 50s, it was very clear what girls were supposed to do and what boys were supposed to do. It didn't even have to be said, because it was part of your upbringing from the time you were a child, the kind of toys you played with, the kind of behavior, what was acceptable behavior and what was not. When the women's movement began in this country in the late 60s and grew momentum in the 70s, that was the time when this kind of stereotyping really began to be challenged. Is it necessary, for example, for girls to defer to males? Is it necessary for them to be well-behaved and neat and orderly? And what about what happens in classrooms when boys have all the disruptive behavior and get all the attention, and girls are essentially praised for being neat and orderly and having their homework done. And what are the implications of those kinds of expectations? And I honestly, and myself included, I don't think people questioned whether it was bad or good to have different expectations for males and females. It simply was. And what the women's movement did was made us question that. And it made us take a long look at what were the implications of those kind of expectations. If in fact females really had to be dependent upon males for their security and for their identity, which in fact it was true, and if a woman didn't have if a woman wasn't married and didn't have children, particularly in the 50s, one felt she was a failure. There wasn't a lot of societal acceptance for a woman to have a career of her own and not to have a family. So that meant that women were dependent upon men for their life, for their financial and emotional well-being. Well, of course, what happens when you have half the population, well, obviously not half the population because a lot of women couldn't afford to do that. Women have always worked, but that kind of narrow vision of the future is very disabling. And so many, many women grew up thinking that there were a lot of things they couldn't do. And many of those women grew up to be teachers. And they brought those values and those expectations into the classroom, perhaps not consciously articulated in that negative way, but they had standards of behavior for females and males that related to their own standards of behavior. So when you had a piece of technology come into the classroom, like the computer, and the female teacher was not comfortable with it, and she saw the boys in her classroom were very comfortable with it, enjoyed it because they had been using it at home, it was natural for her to let the boys take over the computer, and natural for her not to particularly encourage the girls to use it because she didn't think they were interested. And the implication of that behavior, of course, as time went on, was that girls became more and more disaffected from technology, and the boys became more and more competent with it. That's a small slice of what sexual socialization is all about. When you stop and you say, wait a minute, let's examine what's happening in your classroom. Why do you think that these girls, if they were given some encouragement and some tools, might not have as much fun with the computer as boys and might not find as much use for it? And if that teacher is willing and open to examine her behavior in her classroom and says, okay, let's take a look at that, makes changes in her classroom, talks about it with the kids, a whole different climate can happen, and a whole different set of behaviors will occur in that classroom. And essentially, that's what's been happening in thousands of classrooms all over the country. It needs to happen in hundreds of thousands. But those kinds of challenging one's assumptions about what's natural and what's right is what's necessary to break down the barriers that sexual stereotyping has erected in past years.
Do you believe that is true for all technological innovation?
I would assume that. I mean, until proven otherwise, yeah. Because I'm not willing to say, well, women probably can do this sort of technology, but not that. I'd never make that assumption. Because, of course, some women will always do some things and some men will not. I mean, you know, I hate to talk, in a sense, there's a certain kind of stereotyping that goes on when you talk about even this issue, and you're saying girls and boys, and you're assuming all girls behave one way and all boys behave another way, and we know that isn't true. I mean, some girls are marvelous at computers from a very young age, and they love it, and they would be very angry at being stereotyped as a girl who doesn't. But generally speaking, when you look at employment patterns, when you look at the behavior of women in general, men buy more computers than women, for example. I mean, that's just a consumer pattern that's well known. So there's some things that we can say that, but we don't want to, I just want to be careful that, you know, obviously we're not talking about all women. But so I would say that I would assume that all technology is accessible and should be accessible to women in the same way as it's accessible to men. And until we're proven otherwise, let's assume that, because that's the best way to go forward, to not set up notions of lack of access.
You start wherever you want to start, if from this or...
I was wondering when that was going to come up. Okay. Yeah. Okay, the question of is technology good per se, and should it be available to everyone? And aren't there some serious questions about the use of technology? Of course. But in our society, it is going to be used. And if females and minorities do not have access to it, they will be disenfranchised, and they will become powerless, and they will become powerless, and all that that implies. So my feeling is that it is extremely important for young children of all both genders and all races, to know about the computer, to be able to use it, to have some understanding with it, to feel comfortable with it, so they then can make a choice as adults what sort of occupations, what sort of work they want to do, and they can choose knowledgeably. And also, more importantly, that they will understand it enough so that as women, they will be willing to take on some of the ethical and moral and societal issues that technology creates, and to deal with that, and to confront a system that is confront a system that is male-dominated and largely white in orientation. In order to have that voice, in order to have that power, they have to have access to the computer, and they have to be willing to take on that fight. And so to stay away from it, or to say they shouldn't get involved in it because it has such destructive potential, I think is very wrong-headed. I think they have to get engaged in it. It's the only way to keep it in line, if in fact that's what's necessary, and it will be. I mean, there has to be a human component to technology, and it cannot be left to a small, narrow band of people, which is a white male mentality. It has to represent the diversity in this country, and the only way that's going to happen is if these people get the competency and the knowledge at an early age, so that they can compete with the males who are getting the competency and the knowledge at a very early age. Okay?
I agree with you.
All right?
Yeah.
There's a lot of other sides of that, and I do appreciate the other sides of it, but I think for our country it's not possible. We have got to be there. I mean, I think there's, in certain countries, in certain ways, you can form another culture and fight it that way, but I don't think in here we can. I don't think we can afford to be disenfranchised.
Well, we already are. It's a matter of coming back.
Well, we already are, but the industry still is young enough. It's the most flexible industry there is yet. I mean, there are more women working in the computer industry than any other industry, really, at various levels, because the industry requires creative, innovative people. And right now, the industry is willing to take whoever they can get if they're bright and they're willing to work 90 hours a week and spend their life at it. I mean, the computer industry, especially here, is not making discriminations on gender and race. They're trying to get the best people they can. And that's, I think, the characteristic of a new industry. And so we're disenfranchised by numbers, but I don't think, and women cannot get up in the higher echelons of computer corporations. I'm not saying that. There is a ceiling. But I think there's more access in this industry than in any other for women and minorities right now. You know, because, you know.
So you were saying that you believe that in other society, in other countries, there is a possibility to create a culture that is going against the mainstream?
I think in some other societies, the voice of dissent is perhaps more powerfully heard in different ways. I'm speaking from very limited experience in the conversations I've had with some women from around the world. In smaller, more homogeneous cultures, it might be possible to make an impact and say no in a very powerful way by having large numbers of women coalesce around a point of view and make their voice known. I'm not so sure, but I know it's not possible in this country because of our diversity. We cannot do that.
Well, I don't think it would be possible as far as the Western world is concerned to create a culture that is alternative to computers, to the electronic revolution. But that is my feeling, you know.
Mm-hmm. There are maybe some places that it's more likely to try it than there is here, but I'm also then thinking of third world countries where, of course, the women, the people who have been most abused by technology are women. in Africa and India, where certain technologies are introduced into the community and it upsets the entire balance of the community and all of the, not just the tradition, but the economic structure of the community, where women hold so much of the work. So the concept of appropriate technology, which is that the technology be introduced that really works for the people and with them, is extremely important. And I think that women really are a moving force in that movement, at least what I know about that movement, particularly in Africa and India. It seems to me that women really are becoming a movement to examine the technology that's being introduced into third world countries and to really monitor and also help to create the appropriate uses of that technology, and also to create an awareness in communities among third world women about not being the recipient of technology that is harmful to them. Certain kinds of birth control, certain kinds of medications, all kinds of things have been tested out on third world women. Somebody has to monitor that, somebody has to stop that. I think women do that. I think that women are watching out for each other in ways that perhaps have not occurred in previous decades. And also, women, like everyone else, understands we really are a global community. And so what happens in a third world country is very important to us. And I think there's kind of a sisterhood of perhaps forming around that. I'd like to hope that anyway.
Do you have an example about women get organized and to monitor, to recruit a special technology?
Well, of course, my most powerful experience of that was when I was in Nairobi at the Women's Conference, and I'm sorry, I cannot remember the date of it anymore. It was 85, I think, where there were 13,000 women from around the world who came together for 10 days to examine the issues, not only of technology, but issues that affected women of all kinds. And that was an experience that anyone who was there will never forget, because you understood the power of collective womanhood. And I think everybody that was there took away an understanding with them of when people work together and when they understand how they must work together, that enormous changes really can happen. And I think seeds of a lot of collective action not only were planted there, but were grown there, because people came to Nairobi from all over the world having done work with each other and with women from all over the world and shared those experiences and went away really enriched and really feeling very powerful for the experience. Now, I hope we don't have to wait 10 years to have that happen again, but it was a very important experience for the 13,000 women that were there, and I suspect for all their networks when they went back home and what they took back home with them.
What about the results
of our programs? Yeah. Okay. Well, we've been working for about 15 years in our programs, and what we've seen, first of all, when we started, we spent a lot of time convincing people this was important. It wasn't so easy. You get teachers to come to the workshop, but it didn't necessarily mean they were ready to do something. You really had to spend a lot of time educating them about socialization. What did it mean, sexual socialization? What does that mean about gender stereotyping? How is it happening in their classroom? I remember a teacher saying to me, this was a male high school teacher, he said to me, I treat all my students the same in my math class. I treat them all as if they were on my football team. And he really believed that he was treating everyone equally. Well, I don't believe that we would hear that comment 15 years later. I mean, I think that there is a general awareness in the society, and certainly among teachers, that equality is not equity. Equality means treating everyone the same, but equity has to do with fairness. And sometimes it is not equitable to treat everybody the same, because people are very different and they need different kinds of things. And I think that more sophisticated understanding of equity and diversity is one of the results of the work that we and many, many people have done. So I think that teachers understand more now. I think that they see more, and certainly we're seeing more girls take mathematics courses in high school. I mean, the enrollment data has just improved enormously. We don't take credit for that. I think this is a matter of the times, the media, but what I do see is that I think the females who have benefited most from the women in math movement are white middle-class females. They are well-educated females who come from homes that are encouraging to them and want them to aspire to more. These are families that maybe 20 years ago would not have felt it was appropriate for their daughter to be a lawyer or a doctor, who today think it's just fine. That's a big change. But in poorer, low-income families and in immigrant families, it's not quite so easy. Because it's not just an attitude change that's necessary. The system has to change. The system has to open up to let these people in. And the system isn't quite ready to do that. And so there's a tremendous issue about how do we really accommodate the enormous diversity in our country and still protect what some people feel like we need to protect in terms of values and standards. This is a struggle that everybody's dealing with. How do you let the newcomers in and let them move up? How do you give up some power? Because you can't keep the power and let new people in at the same time. And I think every teacher in every classroom in our country is struggling with this, because most teachers now have classrooms that are characterized by diversity that was unthinkable 20 years ago. And they are dealing with kids who have come from Cambodia, who have never been in school, who have seen their families decimated. They're dealing with Hispanic kids from the barrio who may or may not be first generation, who recognize an alien society when they see it, which is white America. And we're asking teachers to not only deal with this, but to respect these kids and build them into people who help them become people who are going to be contributing members to our society. That's asking a huge amount. And we have to provide as many resources as possible. So while I think we've come a long way in changing the attitudes about gender stereotyping, I think we have enormous way to go in terms of race and class stereotyping.
Well, not only in this country, well, in Italy too. Every country that it's where you have immigrants, because then also the trend of the country, the politics of the country is to Americanize everybody, to make Italians everybody.
Right.
What you were saying, that you have to realize that every individual.
Right. And these people don't want to be Americanized in the way that the immigrants who came from Europe in the 20s and 30s wanted to assimilate and become American. I mean, you know, the blacks and the Hispanics are a proud culture, and they want to have their culture and still partake of what the middle-class Americans do. So it's really an interesting time to live.
You know, probably at the beginning of the century, except probably for the Irish, but the Italians, they were ashamed to give the Italian culture to the kids. They were willing, to Americanize the first generation immediately.
Right. How many numbers we're talking about?
Yeah, numbers.
Well, you want to take it or just as an information?
The program started in 1977. We had 40 teachers. Came for 5 days, and now in 1990, I suspect there's probably been 35 or 40,000 teachers in the U.S. who have participated in equals programs, either here in Berkeley or in our 10 sites around the country. We've also traveled really around the world and brought this program to other countries. We have a whole series of publications. We have 8 books that we've gone through 7 and 8 printings with that have our curriculum materials and our activities. So the program is really quite well known, and I think it has probably a long life ahead of it, too. I hope. Maybe I should